You close the front door behind you. The room is quiet, nobody needs anything, and something in your chest that you didn't even notice was clenched finally lets go. If someone asked, you probably say you're just an introvert, that you recharge alone, that you're good with your own company. And all of that is true, but it isn't the whole truth. Because what moves through you in that moment isn't only preference, it's relief. And relief is a strange thing to feel about being away from people you genuinely love. You're not antisocial. That's the part most people get wrong about you. You have friends. You're warm with them. You listen well. You remember things. You show up. People generally like being around you. But somewhere in the middle of it, a quiet countdown starts. An hour in, 2 hours in, 3, and something begins to drain out of you. Not boredom, not dislike, something closer to fatigue. Except you haven't done anything physical at all. You're just there, being pleasant, and it's costing you something. So you start managing it. You become the person who arrives a little late and leaves a little early. You keep an eye on the door. You calculate halfway through the evening exactly how much longer you can stay before you start to feel scraped thin. And when you finally get home and the quiet closes over you, that first breath alone feels like taking off shoes that were half a size too small. Shoes you've been wearing so long you'd stop noticing they hurt. The world hands you an easy explanation for all of this. You're an introvert. People drain your battery, solitude charges it, and that's a neat description. It's just not an explanation. It tells you what happens without ever telling you why. Why does the battery drain in the first place? Why does simply being near other humans cost you something it doesn't seem to cost the person sitting right next to you, in the same room, at the same party, having what looks like the same evening? Here's what's actually running underneath. For a lot of people, this traces back to a childhood where being around people was, quietly, a job. It doesn't have to have been dramatic. There didn't need to be shouting or chaos. Sometimes it was just a house where the weather changed without warning, where one adult could go silent in a way that made the air feel heavy, or where somebody's mood on any given evening decided what kind of evening everyone else was going to have. And a child living in that room learns something very early, long before they have language for it. They learn to read. You learn to scan, to track, to notice the change in a footstep before anyone spoke, to catch the shift in a voice, to feel the temperature of a room the second you walked into it. And more than that, you learn to adjust, to be small when small was safer, to be funny when funny diffused things, to be helpful, useful, easy, quiet, whatever that particular moment seemed to ask for. None of it was a decision. It was a system running underneath your attention all the time whenever other people were present. And that system never fully turned off. It's still running now. That's the part almost nobody names. When you walk into a room full of people today, some part of you is still reading the weather, still tracking who's tense, who went quiet, whether that pause meant something, whether you said the wrong thing 30 seconds ago. You're not choosing to do it. It's a background process you never installed and never learned how to close. Which brings us to the actual mechanism. Being alone was never the thing you fell in love with. Alone was the only room where the scanning stopped, where nobody's mood was your responsibility, where you didn't have to be anything, or manage anything, or track anything. It wasn't that you preferred your own company to everyone else's. It's that your own company was the only place that didn't come with a job attached. So, the sentence people use for you, "She likes being alone, he needs a lot of space," is close but slightly wrong. You don't love being alone. You love not having to monitor anyone. And once you see that, a lot of small things start making sense, like the very particular joy of plans being canceled. Not disappointment, not even neutral, but genuine guilty happiness that you'd never say out loud. Like the way you sit in your car for a minute after a really good evening with people you actually love. Engine off, not doing anything, just existing before you drive home. Like preferring one person to 5, because one set of signals is manageable and 5 is a switchboard. Like how family gatherings leave you flattened even when nothing bad happened, especially when nothing bad happened because you spent the whole time making sure of it. Like the way you sometimes know how you're going to leave before you've even fully arrived. None of those are signs that something's wrong with you socially. They're the receipts of work being done, invisible work, that nobody thanks you for, that you don't even get to notice you're doing. Your body usually knows before you do. Long before the thought "I want to go home" ever arrives, there's a set of tells. The jaw that's been quietly holding, the shoulders sitting a little higher than they need to, the way your answers get shorter and more efficient, the way you start listening slightly less and nodding slightly more. And then, at some point after you leave, comes that exhale. Not a decision, a release. The kind your body does on its own the moment it's finally allowed to. That exhale is worth noticing, because it's the clearest evidence there is that something was being carried. People who genuinely find company effortless don't have that moment. There's nothing for them to put down. And this is where it starts to cost you more than energy, because the people closest to you don't see the work. They only see the leaving. Your partner notices you went quiet on the drive home. A friend notices you took 3 days to answer a simple message. Someone you love asks carefully whether they did something wrong, and you don't have a good answer because the honest one sounds absurd out loud. It isn't you, it's that being around anyone costs me something, and I ran out. So you apologize for something you can't explain, and a thin layer of guilt settles on top of the tiredness. Now you're not just depleted, you're depleted and quietly ashamed of it. And that guilt does something unfair. It makes the next invitation heavier than the last one, because now going out isn't just tiring, it's a test you might fail again. That's how something that started as protection slowly hardens into a wall. Here's where it gets more tangled, though, because that scan is invisible. You never really got to test whether it's still needed. Most of the rooms you walk into now are safe. The people around you are, for the most part, not unpredictable. Nobody's mood is going to reshape your night the way it once did. But the system doesn't know that. It was built in a room where the danger was real, and it never got the update. So it runs anyway. At full cost, at full volume, in rooms that stopped requiring it years ago. And there's a second thing that happens, quieter and slower. At some point, the solitude stops being a strategy and becomes an identity. I'm just a private person. I'm not a people person. I'm happiest on my own. And once it becomes who you are instead of what you learned, the question closes. You stop asking whether it's still true or whether it was ever the whole story, because it's now just a fact about you, like your height. I want to be careful here because this is easy to hear the wrong way. None of this means your love of solitude is fake or a symptom or something to be cured. It isn't. What you built in those quiet rooms is real and it's yours. Most people can't sit with themselves for an hour without reaching for a screen. You can. You have an inner life, a self-sufficiency, a depth that came from all that time alone. You learned how to be your own company, and that's not a small thing. A lot of adults never manage it at all. So this isn't a diagnosis. It's just a distinction worth having. There's a difference between choosing solitude and defaulting to it, between resting alone and hiding alone. They can look identical from the outside. Same closed door, same quiet room, same person on the couch, but they feel completely different on the inside, and they lead to very different places. Here's how you tell them apart. After a stretch of time alone, notice which direction you move. When it's rest, something in you eventually refills, and you find yourself thinking of someone. You want to send the message, make the plan, hear a voice. The door opens on its own. When it's hiding, the opposite happens. The longer the door stays shut, the heavier it gets. A week goes by, then 2. Reaching out starts to feel like it requires a running start. The quiet stops being restorative and starts being a place you can't quite leave. There's a second thing worth paying attention to, and it's more useful than it sounds. Notice the people around whom the scan doesn't run, because they exist. There's usually at least one person you can be with where you don't monitor anything, where the silence isn't a problem to solve, where you're not tracking their mood, where you can leave a sentence unfinished and it's fine. With that person, you don't get the countdown. You might even leave feeling more full than when you arrived. That's not luck, and it's not that you like them more. It's that your system, correctly, does not classify them as work. That's worth knowing because it tells you the tiredness was never really about people. It was about vigilance. And vigilance is specific. It fires around unpredictability, around people whose reactions you can't quite forecast. Where there's genuine safety, the system quiets down all on its own, which means the goal was never to become someone who loves crowds. It's just to notice that the room you're in right now might be safer than the room that built the habit. So the shift, if there is one, is smaller than you'd think. It isn't forcing yourself to socialize more, and it isn't fixing your personality. It's just letting yourself be curious. Asking in a given moment whether you're going home because you're genuinely full or because leaving is simply what you've always done at this point in the evening. Sometimes the honest answer is you're full and you go home, and that's the right call. Sometimes you notice you weren't actually tired yet. You were just running an old routine on schedule, and letting yourself stay a little longer in the company of someone who doesn't cost you anything isn't a betrayal of who you are. You don't have to become an extrovert. You don't have to love the crowd or say yes to everything or apologize for needing the quiet. The quiet is still yours. It always was. But it's worth remembering what the quiet actually was back at the beginning. It wasn't that you loved empty rooms. It was that empty rooms were the only ones where nothing was required of you. That was never really a love of solitude. It was a child finding the one place where they could finally set everything down. And the thing about being an adult is that you get to choose your rooms now. Some of them will still cost you, and you'll leave early, and that's fine. But some of them won't cost you anything at all. And those ones you can stay in, not because you're forcing yourself, but because there's genuinely nothing to carry. You were never trying to get away from people. You were just trying to find somewhere safe enough to stop scanning. And you're allowed to find that in more than one room.